Welcome to Ancient Wisdom. My name is Socrates, and today I am going to talk about Protagoras, the wise and wandering teacher who once said, "Man is the measure of all things." Tonight, we walk not through battlefields or courts, but through the calm chambers of the mind, where words once shaped the fate of Athens and the thought of humankind. For Protagoras was among those who turned the eye of wisdom from the stars above to the heart within. He taught that truth is not a single stone shining in the dark, but a light seen differently in every soul. And in this, perhaps, he touched a mystery deeper than he knew. I remember when Athens was alive with talk of the Sophists, men who traveled from city to city, carrying ideas as others carried goods. They came not to conquer, but to persuade, not to rule, but to reveal that reason itself was a kind of power. They spoke in the halls of noblemen, in the open air of the agora, even in the shade of olive trees, where young minds gathered to listen. And among them all, Protagoras shone like a morning star, calm in speech, graceful in thought, yet stirring in those who heard him the sense that the world was not fixed but living. He believed that wisdom could be taught, that virtue, courage, justice, temperance, and piety were not gifts from the gods, but lessons for men to learn. He said that every man, through reason and reflection, could shape his own measure of the good. To many this was a comfort, to others a danger. But to me it was an invitation, an opening door to dialogue and discovery. In those days, Athens was a garden of minds. The wind carried laughter, argument, poetry, and law alike. And in that fertile air, Protagoras planted his thought, that perception itself gives birth to truth. If one man feels the wind cold and another warm, both are right, for each measures by his own sense. And if we understand this deeply, he said, we may learn to speak with gentleness, knowing that another's. For though time has carried away his scrolls and silenced his voice, his thought remains like ripples across the sea of centuries, each wave reminding us that truth, like the ocean, changes with the light that touches it. When I first heard the name of Protagoras, I was still a young man walking through the marble streets of Athens, full of questions that the city itself could not answer. His reputation had already reached our shores from distant Abdera, a place by the sea where the winds carried both the scent of salt and the murmur of restless minds. They said he was a man who walked with calm certainty, measuring not the stars or the rivers, but the very nature of thought itself. While others gazed upward to seek truth among the gods, Protagoras looked within the human being and found there an entire cosmos, shifting, alive, immeasurable yet somehow complete. He was born in a small town, but his spirit was too large to remain confined. As he grew, he began to travel across Greece, speaking to those who longed to learn the art of reason. In every city he visited, he carried no scrolls, no relics, only questions and words. Yet these in his hands became as powerful as any king's army. They say that as a youth, he once crafted a simple device, a bundle of sticks bound so tightly together that it could bear great weight. From that day forward, he learned that strength lies in unity, of thoughts, of words, of people. And perhaps it was this image that followed him through life, shaping his belief that knowledge itself could bind the scattered pieces of human understanding into harmony. When he arrived in Athens, the city was alive with brilliance, sculptors shaping marble as if it were breath itself, poets singing of gods and men, statesmen debating the meaning of justice. Yet amidst this beauty and order, there was confusion too, each man certain that his view was right, each convinced that the world should mirror his belief. Into that noise, Protagoras brought a simple yet startling idea. Man is the measure of all things, of those that are, that they are, and of those that are not, that they are not. At first, people took it as arrogance, as if he were claiming that truth bends to human will. But he did not mean that. He meant that truth as we know it is filtered through our senses, our hearts, our understanding. That the same world appears different to each person because each person is the lens through which it is seen. When I met him, he spoke with the calmness of a man who needed no victory. His voice was steady, unhurried, as though each word was shaped with care before it left his lips. His eyes were gentle, but behind them burned the fire of a man who had looked deeply into thought itself. "Tell me, Socrates," he said with a faint smile, "how can one man claim to see for another? We are all the measure, and our sight defines our world." I asked him, "Then is there no truth that stands beyond us?" He paused, not in doubt but in reflection. Perhaps truth stands beyond, but we can only reach it through ourselves. To know what is true for another, we must first understand what it means to be them. That night I walked home slowly through the quiet streets. The lamps burned low, the stars shimmered above the Acropolis, and his words echoed in my mind like the sound of water falling into a still basin. For if each person measures the world differently, how can we ever agree? And yet, if we listen, truly listen, perhaps the harmony of many voices creates a fuller truth than any single one alone. In that thought, I began to see the beauty in Protagoras' teaching, not as a denial of truth, but as an invitation to compassion. To understand another's view is not to surrender your own, but to let both exist side by side, like two lights that make the night brighter together. And so I understood why men called him the one who measured the world. He did not measure with rulers or instruments. He measured through the hearts of those he met, through their hopes, fears, and understanding. As I lay in my bed that night, I could almost hear his calm voice carried on the wind from Abdera, whispering that all knowledge begins not in certainty but in awareness. And that awareness, gentle, humble, human, is the truest beginning of wisdom. There was a time in Athens when wisdom itself became a calling, and men journeyed across seas and deserts to teach it. These were the days of the Sophists, those who carried learning as others carried spice or gold. They were not bound to temples or academies. They were wanderers of the mind, merchants of understanding, travelers between ignorance and insight. In the beginning, their arrival was met with wonder. For the Sophists came speaking not of the gods, but of men, of justice, law, persuasion, and the art of living well among others. They said that wisdom was not hidden in sacred texts or in divine mysteries, but could be found in the heart of conversation, in the clarity of speech, and in the careful shaping of thought. Athens, ever hungry for novelty, welcomed them eagerly. The young, especially, were drawn to their eloquence, to the way their words flowed like water, washing away confusion and revealing form beneath chaos. To listen to a sophist was to feel, for a moment, that one might understand the very pattern of reason itself. They taught that the greatest power a man could wield was the power of logos, speech guided by understanding. With it, they said, one could make the weaker argument appear the stronger, turn anger to peace, or lead a crowd wherever reason or skill desired. To some, this art was beautiful, to others, dangerous. For in the wrong hands, eloquence could become a weapon. And thus the Sophists divided opinion. Were they healers of the mind or merely clever illusionists of the tongue? I often watched them in the agora. Around them gathered the sons of wealthy citizens, handsome, eager, restless with the energy of youth. They would lean forward, eyes bright, as the Sophists drew circles of reason around them. Words rose and fell like music, arguments coiled and uncoiled, and by the end, the listener felt both enlightened and uncertain, as though truth itself had shifted while he looked at it. Protagoras stood among them, yet apart. He did not shout or boast. His manner was that of a man who respected the silence between words as much as the words themselves. He believed that knowledge was a craft, a technique, like the work of a sculptor. To shape a mind, one must first understand its form. He once told me, "Speech, Socrates, is not born from noise, it is born from listening." The teacher's first lesson must be silence. I admired that. For though I questioned many sophists for selling their wisdom as if it were a fine garment, I could not deny that in their teaching burned a spark of awakening. They stirred Athens from its sleep. They made men question law, custom, and belief, not to destroy them but to understand why they stood. The Sophists changed the way men thought about virtue. Before them, virtue was seen as a gift of birth or favor of the gods. But they declared that virtue could be taught, that one could learn to be just, to be brave, to be wise. It was a radical thought, that goodness might be cultivated through education, not merely inherited or bestowed. And though I disagreed with some of their methods, I saw in their teaching the same desire that guided my own life, to awaken the soul to its own ignorance so that true wisdom might begin. Many of my fellow Athenians feared the Sophists. They said the old ways were fading, that tradition was being unstitched by clever tongues. But I saw something different. I saw a city learning to think aloud. Athens became a great mirror of conversation. Every corner, every courtyard echoed with voices, debating justice, questioning the gods, exploring what it means to live rightly among men. In that vibrant noise, something sacred was happening. Thought itself was being reborn. And at the heart of it all stood men like Protagoras, the quiet revolutionaries of the spirit, who taught that wisdom was not a possession but a practice. Athenian marble may have gleamed under the sun, but it was their words that truly lit the age. It was in the grand house of Callias, son of Hipponicus, that I first sat face to face with Protagoras. The house stood near the northern slope of Athens, open to the soft breath of the sea. Within its wide courtyard, torches flickered against polished stone, and laughter drifted like music between the pillars. Callias was known throughout the city as a lover of learning and a friend of philosophers. His home was often filled with guests from every corner of Greece. Poets, musicians, scholars, and seekers of wisdom. On that evening, I was invited among them, drawn by the rumor that Protagoras himself would be present. When I arrived, I saw him standing at the far end of the courtyard, surrounded by students and admirers. His robe was simple, yet his bearing noble. His eyes, calm and observant, moved gently over those who spoke, as though he was measuring not their words but the thoughts behind them. I approached, and Callias greeted me warmly. "Socrates," he said, "tonight the house is blessed, for the keenest mind of Athens shall meet the finest teacher of Greece." Protagoras turned to me and smiled, that subtle, knowing smile I had already heard described by many. "So this is the gadfly of Athens," he said softly. "The man who stings wisdom awake wherever he finds it." "And you," I replied, "are the man who teaches it to fly." Laughter rose among the listeners, light and easy, and Protagoras gestured for me to sit beside him. Around us, the evening air shimmered with the quiet expectancy of minds eager to witness what might unfold. He began with grace. "Socrates, it is said that you question all men in pursuit of truth. Then question me if you will, and I shall answer as best I can." I asked, Tell me, Protagoras, do you believe that virtue can be taught? He nodded without hesitation. I do. For just as a craftsman teaches his apprentice to shape wood or bronze, so can a teacher shape the soul toward justice, temperance, and wisdom. We are born with the capacity for goodness, but not the knowledge of it. And yet, I said, if virtue may be taught, then there must be a clear measure of it, something that defines what is good. But if, as you say, man is the measure of all things, how can one man teach another what is better or worse? The room fell quiet. Even the servants paused at the edges of the courtyard. The light of the torches trembled upon Protagoras' face, revealing not pride but patience. He answered slowly, his voice deep and even. Socrates, you ask a question that pierces the heart of all learning. I do not deny that each man measures truth through his own sight. But teaching is the art of refining that sight, of helping one see more clearly. To teach virtue is to awaken the mind to the balance that already lives within it. He leaned closer. We do not create justice by teaching it, we reveal it. Just as the sculptor frees the form hidden within the marble. I said, then perhaps you and I are not so different. You teach men what they may already possess. I only ask them to see what they already know. He smiled again, and for a moment the room seemed softer, the air warmer. Around us, young men whispered to one another, some inspired, some confused, all alive with thought. Then Protagoras turned to them and said, remember, my friends, no man holds all truth. Not I, not Socrates, not even the gods who shaped us. But by speaking and listening, we come closer to the harmony that truth demands. Those words lingered in me long after the gathering ended. I left Callia's house that night beneath a silver sky, the stars scattered like bright seeds of wisdom waiting to take root. As I walked home through the narrow streets, I felt neither victory nor defeat, only a deep, tranquil joy. For I had met a man who did not seek to conquer with words, but to understand through them. That night, Athens itself seemed quieter, as if listening to the echo of that conversation. Two minds meeting not in conflict, but in reverence for the search that binds all men, the search for what is true. In the days that followed my meeting with Protagoras at the house of Callias, his words lingered in my thoughts like the scent of olive wood after a fire. I walked through the streets of Athens with questions moving quietly through my mind, as steady as the rhythm of my sandals on the stone. Can virtue be taught? This was the question that glowed at the center of all our talk, the spark that neither of us could let die. Athens was alive with the business of daily life, the merchants calling from their stalls, the poets rehearsing in the shade of the Stoa, the laughter of children chasing one another beneath the marble steps. Yet beneath all that movement, I could feel the same uncertainty stirring in the hearts of men. What does it mean to be good? Is it a gift or a practice? Protagoras had said that virtue could indeed be taught, as a man teaches another to build or speak. And I, who had long sought to awaken wisdom in those around me, could not dismiss his thought so easily. But still I wondered, what is it that we teach when we teach virtue? That evening, I went down to the river Ilissos, where the air was cooler and the city's noise softened into the rustle of water and reeds. I sat beneath a fig tree and let the question move through me slowly. The stars had not yet appeared, but the sky had begun to darken, that tender hour when thought becomes quiet enough to listen. I thought of courage. Can one be taught to face fear? Can one learn bravery from another's tongue? And justice, can it be handed from teacher to student as a potter gives shape to clay? Protagoras believed so. He said that through guidance and repetition, the soul may learn balance, that right action can become as natural as breathing. But I wondered if true virtue required something deeper, not the memory of lessons, but the awakening of understanding. For a man may repeat noble words and still not be noble. He may act rightly from habit and yet never touch the heart of goodness. The crickets sang their patient song and I listened. I found myself murmuring softly as if speaking to an unseen friend. Perhaps virtue is not taught as a craft, but remembered as a truth already within. For I have always believed that the soul carries within it the pattern of what is good, that learning is not discovery of something foreign, but recognition of something forgotten. When I question others, it is not to fill them with knowledge, but to draw out what sleeps within. Protagoras, though, approached from another path. He saw wisdom as a lamp to be passed from one hand to another, each man lighting the next. And I could not deny the beauty in that vision either. Perhaps both paths meet at last, for the lamp burns only if the flame is already there. I remember once asking him again, "Tell me, Protagoras, what do you teach when you teach virtue?" He smiled, his eyes soft in the light of the afternoon sun. "I teach men to listen to themselves, Socrates, for within every man lives a measure, and through that measure he finds his way." Then, I said, "Perhaps you do as I do, only you charge for it." He laughed quietly. "Perhaps. But even the gods require offerings before they give their gifts." There was no malice in his tone, only a gentle humor. And I thought then how strange it is that wisdom can wear so many faces, teacher and student, questioner and orator, and yet seek the same truth beneath them all. When I rose to leave the riverside, the sky had grown dark, and the first stars shimmered upon the water. Their reflections trembled with the current, yet the stars above remained still, perfect, serene. And I thought, so too is virtue. The reflections of it in men may waver and change, but the true light remains untouched, somewhere above the noise of our thoughts. I walked home through the quiet streets, carrying that thought like a lantern, not to find the end of the question, but to keep the path before me gently lit. There is a saying of Protagoras that echoes through the ages, a phrase so simple that it seems at first like a riddle whispered by the wind: "Man is the measure of all things." I remember when he first spoke those words in the agora. The crowd leaned in, their faces lit by the morning sun, their minds restless with curiosity. Some smiled, believing they understood. Others frowned, sensing in it a challenge to everything they held sacred. As for me, I listened, and I felt in those few words a doorway open, one that led not into certainty, but into the vast quiet of thought. What did he mean that man is the measure? To Protagoras, it was not arrogance that shaped this idea, but humility. He did not claim that man ruled the universe, but that each of us experiences it through the narrow gate of our own perception. We do not see the world as it is, we see it as we are. If one man finds the wind cold and another finds it warm, who is right? Both are, he said, for each measures by his own sense. The truth of warmth or coldness is not in the air itself, but in the experience of the soul that feels it. At first, many thought he meant that there is no truth at all, that all things are mere illusion. But I knew better. Protagoras was not denying truth, he was revealing its depth. Truth, he believed, lives not in one fixed place but within the living harmony of all human experience. As I pondered his words, I began to see how they might serve as a bridge between men, between ideas, between worlds. If each of us measures the world differently, then wisdom begins when we learn to compare those measures with patience and kindness. It is in the gentle act of understanding another's vision that our own grows clearer. That evening, as the light softened over the Parthenon and the shadows stretched long across the marble steps, I walked through the marketplace listening to the hum of voices, buyers and sellers, poets and craftsmen, strangers and friends. Each spoke their truth, each saw the world through a slightly different lens. And yet, together, they formed the living breath of Athens. I realized then what Protagoras must have seen, that the beauty of our world lies in its diversity of perception. The carpenter, the soldier, the philosopher, the child, each measures life by what he knows, what he feels, what he hopes for. None is wrong and none is complete without the other. Still, I could not let go of a certain question. If every man's measure is his own, how can we ever know justice or goodness or truth that binds us all? For if I call something good and another calls it evil, do we not stand forever divided? Protagoras once answered this in his calm, deliberate way. Socrates, he said, truth is not found in isolation. It lives in the space between minds. When men speak, listen, and seek harmony, their measures join, and from their union arises a fuller truth. Those words stayed with me, for they echoed what I too had begun to feel, that the soul grows not in solitude but in dialogue. That wisdom is born not from victory, but from understanding. As I walked home that night, the lamps of Athens flickered like small suns along the streets, each casting its own circle of light. I thought of how each man too carries his own lamp of perception. Small, fragile, precious. Alone, its glow is limited, but together they make the city shine. And so I came to see the meaning of that phrase not as a claim of human pride, but as a call to empathy. To say that man is the measure of all things is to remember that behind every opinion, every act, every word, there is a living heart measuring its world as best it can. If we wish for peace, we must learn to honor those measures, not to surrender truth, but to expand it. For truth, like the horizon, widens as we walk toward it. That night, as I lay upon my bed, I let the phrase whisper again through my thoughts. Man is the measure of all things. And somewhere beyond sleep, I felt it change shape, not as a rule of reason, but as a melody of understanding, sung by the soul of humanity itself. There are nights in Athens when the wind moves softly through the narrow streets, carrying with it the scent of olive and dust, and I remember the words of Protagoras as if they were carried upon that same breeze. Each man feels the wind differently, and each is right. It is a simple thought, yet it humbles the proudest of minds. For it reminds us that truth is not a statue carved once and forever. It is a breeze, invisible yet felt, shifting as it touches each of us in our own way. When Protagoras spoke of perception, he was not merely speaking of sight or sound. He spoke of the whole instrument of being, the mind, the heart, the memories that shape our understanding. Every man's experience becomes the glass through which he looks upon the world, and no two glasses are the same. I once walked with him along the western hills, where the city fades and the earth opens to the sea. It was late afternoon, and the sun burned gold upon the waves. He asked me, "Tell me, Socrates, what color is the sea?" I looked and said, "It is blue." He smiled gently. "And yet a fisherman will call it silver, a sailor green, and a child will call it endless. Are they wrong?" I could not answer, for I knew his point had already taken root. Each man names what he sees according to what he has lived. If this is so, then to argue over truth is often to argue over shadows, each of us describing the same light from a different place. But there is a deeper meaning still. For if perception shapes reality, then the way we choose to see the world becomes our greatest act of creation. To see with anger is to live in a world of enemies, To see with peace is to dwell in a garden of calm. In my own way, I have come to believe that wisdom begins when we understand this power, the power not to control what we see but to choose how we see it. There was a man I knew once, a builder of ships. He complained that his apprentices were careless, that nothing was ever made to his measure. One day he came to me in frustration and said, "Socrates, every man I hire fails me. They cannot see the line as I see it." And I said to him, "Then perhaps you must learn to see through their eyes for a moment, for the ship you build will carry not only your design, but their hands as well." He looked at me strangely, but many months later he returned, calmer, softer. "You were right," he said. "When I began to teach them not my way but the way, their craft grew strong." That, I think, is the heart of Protagoras' wisdom. To recognize that others see differently is not weakness, it is strength. For from that difference arises the bridge that unites us. When the Sophists spoke, many accused them of twisting truth, of making the weaker argument appear stronger. And yes, some did. But in Protagoras, I found something purer, a desire not to dominate, but to illuminate. He wished men to see the shape of thought itself, how belief, language, and perception dance together like wind upon the water. Once, as we stood overlooking the agora, he said, "Socrates, imagine truth as the sea. Each man draws a cup of it and says, 'Here it is.' Yet what he holds is not the sea, only his portion of it. Should we not listen to each other, that we may understand the vastness of what lies beyond our grasp?" I nodded, for I had no better answer. Since then, I have watched the winds of perception move across every gathering, every court, every debate. Men raise their voices, each claiming the wind blows from his side, never realizing it moves freely across all. So I have learned to listen more than I speak, and when I speak, to do so as gently as I can, for truth does not shout, it whispers. It is the quiet balance between one heart and another. When you wake tomorrow and feel the wind upon your face, think of this. Somewhere, another feels that same breeze and calls it by another name. Yet it is the same wind that moves them both. And in that shared motion, perhaps, lies the truest measure of what it means to be human. Among all the gifts that the gods have given mankind, few are as wondrous or as perilous as the gift of speech. A single word may soothe the wounded or wound the gentle. It may kindle understanding or ignite confusion. And it was this mysterious power that Protagoras sought to master, not for domination but for illumination. He often said, "Speech is the bridge between souls." When the bridge is strong, two minds may walk across and meet in harmony. When it is weak, they shout across the distance and nothing is heard but echoes. I remember one quiet morning in the Stoa, where he taught a circle of eager students. The air was clear and the marble beneath our feet gleamed with the new sun. He stood before them without scrolls or tablets, only his voice calm and measured as though he was sculpting the air itself. "Words," he said, "are not mere sounds, they are vessels for thought. The wise man fills them with meaning, but the foolish man lets them drift empty across the world." He paused, and his eyes moved over the young faces before him. To speak well is to think well. To think well is to live rightly. Remember this, a tongue guided by ignorance is more dangerous than a sword guided by rage. I watched them listen, and I felt the truth of it echo even in my own heart. How often had I seen speech used to conceal rather than reveal? Words twisted not toward clarity but toward persuasion. The Sophists were accused of this often, and sometimes not without cause. Yet in Protagoras I found a gentler intention. He wished not merely to win arguments, but to awaken reason, to teach that language itself is a form of virtue. He told me once, Socrates, to teach a man to speak is to teach him to see. For every word he utters shapes the world he believes in. That night I pondered his saying. I thought of the orators in the assembly, men whose words could move the city to war or to peace. I thought of poets whose verses shaped love and longing in the hearts of strangers. I thought of the quiet conversations between friends, where truth slips between laughter and silence. Indeed, every act of speech is a choice. We may speak to dominate or to understand, to boast or to build. And though words are born from air, they leave marks deeper than stone. There was a story Protagoras liked to tell his students. He said that long ago, before men learned to speak, they wandered the earth in confusion. They saw the same sun, the same rivers, but could not share what they felt. Then one day, a man lifted his hand toward the sky and made a sound that meant light. Another understood and repeated it. From that moment, the silence of the world was broken. And through words, men began to know one another. When he finished telling this story, he would smile and say, "Do not forget that every word you speak carries a little of that first miracle. Use it wisely." I too have spent my life in conversation. Many believe I question others to prove them wrong. But no, I ask questions because I believe truth is born between voices. A dialogue is not a duel, it is a dance. In this, Protagoras and I were alike. Though we walked different paths, he teaching for gold, I questioning for free, both of us trusted in the same power, that through words the soul might awaken to itself. The art of speech, he taught, is not only to persuade but to purify. To speak with clarity is to cleanse confusion. To speak with gentleness is to heal division. And when one speaks truthfully, not as a weapon but as an offering, the world grows quieter, more luminous. As the sun set that evening over Athens, its light spilling like honey across the roofs, I thought of all the words spoken that day, words of trade, of love, of debate, of prayer. So many sounds, yet all seeking the same thing, to be understood. And I wondered, perhaps speech too is a measure of man. Not in how loudly he speaks, but in how carefully. Not in how much he convinces, but in how much he connects. If we learn to speak with kindness, with truth, and with care, then perhaps the distance between hearts becomes smaller, until, in the stillness after words, we finally hear what silence has been saying all along. There was always a murmur among the people of Athens whenever the name of Protagoras was spoken. They admired his wisdom, but they whispered of his fees. For unlike the philosophers who spoke freely in the marketplaces or the Stoas, the Sophists asked for payment. Their knowledge, they said, had value, and value must be honored. It was this, more than their ideas, that troubled many Athenians. They could not understand how wisdom, a thing so pure, could be sold like grain or silver. To them, it seemed an insult to the gods, as if truth itself could be bought by the wealthy and withheld from the poor. I, too, often wondered about this. I lived simply and taught freely, believing that wisdom is a gift one must share without measure. I asked Protagoras about it once as we sat beneath a colonnade watching the sun slip behind the Pnyx. The air was quiet, golden, filled with the murmur of distant voices. "Tell me, Protagoras," I said, "how can wisdom, which belongs to all, be sold to a few?" He smiled in his calm, patient way, folding his hands upon his knee. "Socrates," he said, "is it wrong for a physician to be paid for healing, or for a builder to be paid for shelter? I do not sell truth, I sell the time it takes to guide a soul toward it." I was silent for a while, thinking of his words. There was reason in them. For though I believed wisdom should flow freely like air, I could not deny that even air must be drawn with effort. Protagoras continued, "Consider this, my friend. When a man pays for learning, he values it more deeply. He listens more closely. He labors not to waste what he has earned. The fee is not the price of wisdom, it is the weight that makes it precious." Perhaps there was truth in that. Yet I saw another truth beside it, that the poorest soul yearning for light may be the one most worthy of it. I told him so. He nodded, not in disagreement but in respect. "Then you give freely because the gods have made you rich in spirit, Socrates. But not all men are so blessed. Some need the promise of gold to discipline their will. For them, the fee is not a barrier, it is a doorway." I could not help but laugh softly. "Then we are both healers," I said. "You charge for medicine, I give water to the thirsty." He smiled at that, his eyes brightening with the gentle humor of understanding. "And in the end, both our patients may live." We spoke long into the evening. The city lights began to glow one by one, and the breeze carried the smell of bread from the nearby ovens. As we talked, I began to see that his practice, though different from mine, was not born of greed. It was a reflection of his belief that wisdom must dwell in the world, not above it. For Protagoras understood something subtle, that wisdom, like any craft, requires exchange, not only of coin but of attention, discipline, and gratitude. He did not sell knowledge, he invited men to value it. Still, I could not follow him completely down that path. For I believed, and still believe, that the truest wisdom comes only when the soul opens without condition, when it is moved by love of truth itself, not by what it costs. Yet even in our difference, I felt no division between us. For both of us sought the same thing, to awaken men to themselves. That night, as I walked home through the soft hum of the city, I saw a beggar beneath a lantern, speaking gently to a child. He had no wealth, yet his voice was rich with kindness. I thought then, wisdom is not in what we possess, but in what we give, and the richest man may be the one who shares freely from the well of his heart. The next morning I passed by the school of Protagoras again. His students were gathered, listening with reverence as he spoke of justice and the soul. Some had paid dearly to be there, yet I could see in their eyes that they were receiving something beyond price. And I understood, perhaps for the first time, that every form of wisdom has its cost, whether in silver, in effort, or in humility. But the reward, when found, is always the same, the quiet light that enters the heart when one begins to understand. In those years when Athens shone brightest, the air itself seemed alive with conversation. Every corner of the agora, every shaded porch, every gathering by lamplight was filled with the murmur of words. Men argued not only about the laws of the city, but about the laws of thought itself. And among these voices, few could ignite a discussion as swiftly, or sustain it as gracefully, as Protagoras. He possessed a calm that made others restless. Even in the heat of debate, when voices rose and hands struck the air, he would speak with the steadiness of a man unshaken by victory or loss. His words moved not like the shout of thunder, but like the slow, bright flicker of fire, quiet at first, yet capable of spreading warmth or flame wherever they touched. I remember one day in particular. We stood beneath the colonnade of the Lyceum, surrounded by students and citizens. The question had been asked, is there such a thing as absolute truth? One man shouted, "Of course there is. The gods have written it into the world." Another replied, "No. Truth changes with men and times. The circle tightened, the air grew heavy, and all eyes turned to Protagoras. He smiled faintly and then asked, "Tell me, friends, what is it that you call truth?" Someone answered, "It is that which is the same for all." "Then," he said gently, "show me a thing that all men see alike. One says the day is hot, another says it is mild. One calls an act just, another calls it cruel. Even in worship, one man prays to Athena, another to Apollo. Tell me then, which truth among these has escaped change?" A hush fell over the gathering. His words were not an attack. They were a mirror, quietly showing each listener his own reflection. I stepped forward and said, "Then are we forever lost in our own visions, Protagoras? Is there no light beyond the walls of our minds?" He looked at me with kindness. "We are not lost, Socrates. We are sharing the same road, though each sees it by a different light. To walk together is to draw nearer to what is real. Debate, then, is not to defeat but to approach, to move closer, step by step, to the truth that lies between us." It was then I understood what made his debates unlike any others. To Protagoras, argument was not battle but dialogue, not fire that consumes but fire that reveals. He believed that when two minds meet honestly, both are refined as gold is refined by flame. Still, not all saw it that way. Many Athenians loved the spectacle of argument more than the wisdom within it. They gathered in crowds not to understand but to cheer for victory, as if truth were a sport and not a sacred pursuit. I sometimes watched those debates from the edge of the crowd, the bright flash of logic, the laughter, the applause. It was beautiful and troubling all at once. The Sophists, with their skill in speech, could turn any thought into persuasion, and persuasion, like fire, could both illuminate and destroy. When I spoke privately with Protagoras about this, he sighed softly. "Socrates," he said, "a teacher may give a man a torch, but he cannot decide what that man will burn." His eyes lingered on the distant hills beyond the city. The art of debate is sacred only when guided by the desire to understand. Without that, it becomes mere performance, noise that fills the air and leaves the soul empty. I nodded, for I too had seen words used as weapons, in courts, in councils, even among friends. The sharper the intellect, the greater the danger if the heart remains cold. And yet, in its pure form, debate is a fire that can temper the mind. Through it, we learn patience, humility, and precision. When used with care, it burns away confusion and leaves the bright ember of understanding. That night, after the debate had ended, I walked home through the dim streets of Athens. The torches along the walls flickered in the wind, their flames bending but not dying. I thought of the words spoken that day, how some had sparked anger, others reflection. And I realized something simple yet profound. The fire of debate is like the fire of life itself. It may warm us or consume us depending on how we tend it. Protagoras taught men to handle that fire with grace, to speak boldly but listen deeply, to defend ideas yet remain open to change. He showed that the measure of a man's wisdom is not how fiercely he argues, but how gently he seeks to understand. So I still cherish those days of dialogue, when Athens glowed with thought as the night glows with stars, each mind shining, each light different, yet together forming the constellations of our shared search for truth. There comes a time in every city and in every soul when beliefs stand face to face like warriors upon a field. One claims the old way is sacred, another says the new way must rise. And between them stands the trembling bridge of understanding, shaking under the weight of both. So it was in Athens when the teachings of the Sophists began to touch the roots of tradition. For centuries, our people had believed that virtue and truth were gifts of the gods, fixed, eternal, shining from above. But now came men like Protagoras, who spoke softly yet carried a thunder within their words, saying that truth lived within us, that each person carried his own measure of it. This thought frightened many. It seemed to loosen the ground beneath their feet. If truth changes with perception, they said, then what becomes of justice? What becomes of law? If every man is his own measure, does the city not crumble into 1,000 selves? I remember hearing such fears murmured in the porticos and council halls. The elders whispered that the Sophists were corrupting the youth, teaching them to question too much. They said that once a man simply knew his duty, now he debated it. And yet, beneath their fear was something noble, a desire for certainty, a longing for the eternal. For the human heart, though made of breath and clay, always seeks something firm to stand upon. One evening, I sat with Protagoras on the steps of the Odeon. The twilight had gathered over the city, painting the marble in hues of rose and shadow. The sounds of Athens drifted faintly from below, the songs of workers returning home, the bells of merchants closing their stalls. He was quiet for a long while and then said, "Socrates, men accuse me of destroying truth, but I only wish to show them how vast it truly is. When two men disagree, both are seeing some part of the same truth. Each clings to his fragment as if it were the whole, and thus they fight." I said, "Then how can we ever find harmony if truth breaks into pieces?" He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the last light rested upon the sea. By remembering that each piece belongs to a greater whole. If we listen to each other, the fragments fit. The picture grows clearer, not smaller. His words were calm, but I could feel the quiet fire behind them. He did not wish to overthrow belief. He wished to awaken it, to make it living, breathing, evolving like the men who carried it. Still, not all could see that. There were those who clung to absolutes as a sailor clings to his mast in a storm. They needed the gods to decree what is right, because without that voice they feared their own hearts. And perhaps they were right too. For freedom without wisdom is a dangerous gift. I have seen it many times since. Men who twist the idea of all truths are relative into an excuse for selfishness, bending morality to fit their desires. That was not what Protagoras taught. He did not mean that all things are equal. He meant that all understanding begins with the human soul, and thus to reach truth one must refine that soul. It is a teaching easy to mishear and easier still to misuse. For every flame that lights the way, there are others who will try to set fire to the world. But on that quiet evening, as the stars began to appear above us, I understood him more clearly than ever. He was not seeking to destroy truth, but to invite men into it, not as worshippers of fixed idols, but as participants in a living dialogue with reality. Perhaps, I said, truth is like the lyre. Each string sounds different, yet together they make music. He smiled gently. Yes, Socrates, and it is only noise until we learn to listen. When beliefs collide, the air may tremble with conflict. Yet if we listen deeply enough, beneath the clash we may hear a single rhythm, the rhythm of souls trying to remember their harmony. That night, as I walked home through the dim streets, I heard a distant chorus from a festival. Voices rising and blending, some sharp, some soft, yet together forming something greater than any single one could sing alone. And I thought to myself, perhaps that is what truth truly sounds like, not one voice, perfect and unchanging, but many voices in patient accord. There is a tale told quietly among the elders of Abdera, that when Protagoras grew old, his words found enemies among the powerful. Some said he offended the gods with his teachings. Others said he made men doubt what should never be doubted. And so, in fear or anger, they cast his writings into the sea, that the waves might erase him from memory. I have often thought of that story. Whether it is true or not, I cannot say. Yet each time I stand by the shore and watch the tide move in endless rhythm, I feel its meaning. For even if the sea swallowed every scroll he wrote, how could it drown an idea that had already reached the minds of men? Thought, once born, is like water itself. It finds a way to flow. You may dam it, bury it, or pour it into the earth, but still it will return, rising through springs and places unexpected. I remember standing one morning at Piraeus, where the ships of traders swayed in their berths. The sun had just begun to burn away the mist, and the water gleamed like beaten bronze. I watched the waves breaking softly at my feet, and I thought of Protagoras. His life, too, had been like the sea, calm at its surface, yet deep with unseen currents. He had challenged men to think not as they were told, but as they truly saw. To some, that was blasphemy, to others, liberation. But whether loved or feared, his thought could no more be destroyed than the sea could be emptied by a handful of sand. In time, his name faded from the public square. New voices rose. New teachers claimed the city's attention. Yet I still felt his presence in the way men began to speak, more carefully, more self-aware, more willing to question what once was held beyond question. His ideas had seeped into the soil of Athens like hidden rain, nourishing minds that would never know his face. I once told a student, "Do not fear when wisdom seems forgotten. The waves that retreat always return. For all truth, however small, leaves a current behind it. It moves quietly, unseen, yet it shapes the shore." There is a gentleness in that thought, is there not? To know that what we do, what we say, even what we think, becomes part of a greater tide that carries the soul of humanity forward. Perhaps Protagoras' scrolls were burned or cast away. But even so, each question he raised, each mind he awakened, became a living book, written not on parchment, but upon the hearts of those who listened. Sometimes I imagine those lost pages drifting upon the sea, the ink washed away, yet the essence still shimmering in the light. And I think of how many truths the world has lost in flame or water, yet how few are truly gone. For wisdom does not live in words alone. It lives in wonder, in remembrance, in the quiet impulse to ask again why. That, I believe, was the gift of Protagoras. He taught men to ask without fear, to measure the world not by decree but by discovery, to see that the gods need not be diminished by human thought, for perhaps they too speak through it. I have often said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and perhaps he, in his own way, would have answered, the unlived thought is not worth keeping. We were not so different, he and I, two wanderers tracing the same horizon from opposite shores. And so, when I hear the sea whispering against the rocks of Piraeus, I imagine it carrying his voice still, not in words but in rhythm, eternal and calm. Measure not by fear but by understanding. Seek not to own truth but to share in it. The sea does not remember the shape of every ship that sails upon it, yet it holds them all in its motion. So too with wisdom. Men may come and go, but the tide of thought endures. And when the wind moves over the water and catches the edge of a wave, it glitters for a moment, as though some lost fragment of Protagoras' scroll had risen once more to greet the light. As I have grown older, I have come to see that every teacher leaves behind not only his words, but a kind of lantern, a light by which others may travel a little farther into understanding. And though some say that the Sophists were merchants of wisdom, I have found in them, especially in Protagoras, a quiet flame that still glows even in our time. I once dreamed that I walked again through the agora at dawn. The city was empty, the marble pale beneath the rising sun. And there, upon a stone bench, sat Protagoras. He held a lantern in his hand, not burning brightly but softly as if waiting for someone to approach. He looked at me and said, "Socrates, the flame is small, but it is yours to tend." When I awoke, I knew what he meant. For though he had long vanished from the world, his lessons remained, not as rules to obey but as sparks within the soul. What are these lessons, you may ask? They are simple yet profound. First, he taught humility before perception, that each person's view is shaped by their own measure. To live wisely is to remember that what you see is not the whole of what is. If another disagrees, do not rush to judge, for he may be looking from another side of the same mountain. Second, he taught the virtue of listening. Words are not merely weapons to win argument, but windows through which we glimpse another's world. When we listen deeply, without the hunger to reply, we begin to understand not only others but ourselves. Third, he taught the art of balance. Between confidence and doubt, between faith and reason, between the self and the many. Truth, he once told me, is not a fixed point but a motion, like the flame of this lantern. It flickers yet does not vanish. And finally, he taught the courage of inquiry. That to question is not to rebel against the gods, but to honor them by using the reason they have given. To seek understanding is to join creation in its unfolding. These lessons shine quietly, like that small flame I saw in my dream. They do not demand, they invite. They do not shout, they whisper, gently reminding us that wisdom begins not in certainty, but in wonder. I have seen many who mock the Sophists, calling them deceivers or pretenders. Yet I say, the true deception lies not in questioning, but in refusing to question at all. For the mind that closes itself for fear of being wrong has already lost the chance of being right. Protagoras' lantern, I think, was never meant to blind the eyes, but to guide the steps. It is a light of awareness, of knowing that the world is seen differently by each who walks through it. And if we carry that light with care, we will find that it not only shows us the path, but warms the heart of those who travel beside us. Sometimes, as I speak with my students in the cool mornings, I see that same light reflected in their eyes, when they begin to understand that philosophy is not the gathering of answers, but the refinement of seeing. And I tell them softly, do not seek to be right, seek to be clear. Do not seek to win, seek to understand. For it is understanding, not victory, that brings peace to the soul. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of Protagoras. A lantern passed from mind to mind, generation to generation. Its flame may flicker, but it never dies. It lives wherever men and women pause long enough to listen, to question, to reflect. When I walk through Athens at dusk and see the lamplighters at work, lifting their torches to the wicks one by one, I think of him. The city grows brighter not because one flame burns fiercely, but because many flames share their light. And so, the Sophist's lantern still glows, not in the market, not in the courts, but in the quiet chambers of thought, where each of us learns to measure the world anew. There are moments, rare and precious, when the mind grows quiet, when the noise of debate, the rush of words, the chase for meaning all fall away, and what remains is simple awareness. In such stillness, understanding does not arrive like a revelation from above, but like dawn, slow, gentle, inevitable. I remember one evening when such a quiet came upon me. The air was soft with the scent of thyme from the hills, and the city below lay bathed in silver light. I had been speaking all day, questioning, answering, walking with young men who were hungry for truth. But as I sat alone, I felt no more desire to speak. I simply listened, to the faint hum of crickets, to the breath of the wind, to the heartbeat of the world itself. And in that silence I thought of Protagoras. He had once said, "The greatest wisdom is not to know all answers, but to live with the right questions." At the time I argued with him as I always did. But in the stillness of that night I understood. The purpose of wisdom is not to end inquiry, but to bring peace within it. For the human soul, like the sea, is always in motion. Waves of doubt, tides of emotion, storms of belief, all move within us. We imagine that calm comes when the waves cease, but true calm comes when we learn to float upon them. That is the stillness Protagoras spoke of, not silence of thought, but harmony within it. The world is filled with men who seek to be right. Few seek to be at peace. And yet, understanding is not born from conquest, but from acceptance. The soft recognition that others too see their own reflection of truth. When I speak now to those who gather around me in the marketplace, I no longer seek to defeat their opinions. I ask instead, what do you see? What does it mean to you? For in their answers, I often find the edges of my own ignorance illuminated. Each person, I have learned, is a mirror, reflecting a piece of the vast whole. To listen without resistance is to see more clearly. In that, Protagoras and I were not so far apart. His doctrine that man is the measure of all things was not a cry of pride, but an invitation to compassion. If each man measures differently, then to understand him is to honor the measure he lives by. And in that act of understanding, we begin to form a shared measure, one that does not erase difference but holds it gently. In the stillness of true understanding, judgment fades. The need to be right fades. What remains is clarity, the clear light of awareness that sees without grasping, that listens without fear. That night, sitting upon the hill, I felt this stillness bloom within me. I did not think of truth as something distant or divine, but as something near, breathing through the world, shining quietly through every soul. The torches of Athens flickered below, and I thought of each flame as a thought, some bright, some dim, yet all together lighting the night. Truth was not one torch overpowering the rest, but the gentle union of many lights, each illuminating a corner of darkness. Perhaps that is what Protagoras wished for us to see, that harmony does not destroy difference, it embraces it. That peace is not the silence of argument, but the music that follows when all voices find their rhythm together. As I rose and began the walk back to the city, I felt no need to speak further of it. Some lessons are not meant to be taught, only felt. And as the night wind brushed my face, I whispered to myself, wisdom is not in the speaking, but in the listening. The stars seemed to nod in agreement. The years have turned like gentle waves upon the shore, and many of those who once filled the streets of Athens with their voices are now silent. The stones of the agora remain, but the faces have changed, and even the arguments that once burned brightly have faded into stories whispered by teachers to their students. Yet sometimes, when I pass those same marble steps at dawn, I feel as though I can still hear them, the echo of questions, the murmur of minds awakening. And among those voices, one remains distinct to me still, calm, even thoughtful, the voice of Protagoras. It has been said that his words were dangerous, that they shook the certainty of men. Perhaps they did. But danger is not always destruction. Fire burns, yes, but it also gives light. Protagoras carried a flame into a darkened age, a flame that reminded men that truth, however divine, is lived through human eyes. Now, as I grow older, I find myself returning to his thought again and again. Man is the measure of all things, he said, and where once I met those words with challenge, now I meet them with understanding. For what he meant, I think, was not that truth bends to our desire, but that we must learn to measure ourselves before we measure the world. That all justice, all goodness, all knowledge begins with awareness. Awareness of our own limits, our own perception, our own humanity. It is a humble wisdom. And humility, I have learned, is the truest foundation of peace. I have seen men die for their beliefs and others live without them. I have watched empires rise and crumble, and the winds of opinion change like the seasons. Yet the quiet truth remains, that wisdom is not a fortress built of answers, but a garden tended by understanding. When I was young, I thought truth was a treasure buried deep, waiting to be uncovered. Now I see that it is not buried at all. It grows in plain sight, in the soil of kindness, in the patience to listen, in the courage to doubt without despair. And perhaps that is what Protagoras saw before me, that truth is not a possession but a relationship, between self and world, between question and answer, between one heart and another. If a man lives by this, he will quarrel less and wonder more. He will seek not victory but harmony. And in his quiet seeking, he will find peace that no argument can take away. So when I speak now to those who gather at my side, I no longer urge them to agree with me. I urge them only to think, gently, honestly for themselves, to measure not others first, but their own souls. For if every man and woman tended the garden of their own mind with care, the world itself would bloom with reason and grace. The night grows deep now, and the lamps of Athens flicker like stars fallen to earth. I feel the weight of years, yet also the lightness that comes when the heart no longer clings to being right, only to being awake. And so I will end here as softly as I began. Rest now, my friend. Let the noise of the day drift away, like the tide pulling back from the sand. Remember only this: truth is not thunder. It is a whisper. It is not a crown to wear, but a breath to share. And if you listen, truly listen, you will hear it. In the wind, in the silence, in yourself. Good night. May wisdom walk with you in dreams, and may the measure of your soul be peace.